Welcome to the Paintbrush Prairie podcast. I'm Kinsey Ashcraft, a boutique owner, firefighter wife, and mama of 2 cowgirls, homesteading on a cattle ranch in Oklahoma.
And I'm Talia Watcott, a Western artist and illustrator, mama of 2, and wife of a mountain man, raising babies in the mountains of Utah.
Together, we share a passion for the Western lifestyle, homemaking, and Indian paintbrush flowers.
We're here to inspire and encourage you as we each create a simple but beautiful life on the prairie.
Hey there, friends. Today we have our very first guest, and a special one at that. We are so honored to have Jill Winger on the show today. You may know Jill from the Prairie Homestead, her well-known blog. She is a first-generation homesteader, rancher, blogger, author, and the host of the Old Fashioned on Purpose podcast. Jill, welcome to our podcast, and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We're excited to have you.
Yes, I'm a big fangirl.
Oh, yay. Thanks for following along. It's always fun to chat with fans in person. And I'm a fan of your guys', like the minute I saw your show name and just your podcast art, I didn't even know what your show was about yet. I'm like, that is stunning. Like, I'm already obsessed. So well done. It's a heck of a way to enter the world. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. We really like hearing that. I mean, it's kind of like we put both of our personalities in one, and that's what we came up with. So we hope other people can relate to it.
I think you nailed it. So,
all right. Well, just to get started, let's have you tell us a little bit about kind of your upbringing, how you grew up, how you were raised. Just give us a little bit of background on yourself.
Yeah. So a lot of people assume that I was born into this lifestyle, or I've always been a part of it. That's actually not the case. I was raised very traditionally, kind of a conventional suburban neighborhood in the 90s. Like most people, it just wasn't anything super special. I think the one thing about me that stuck out though is from a very young age, like probably around 2 or 3 years old, I was obsessed with country living and horses and farming and ranching. It's all I wanted. And my parents were kind of like, I don't know where this came from, and this is kind of weird, and maybe she'll outgrow it. And I didn't. So that has been kind of the driving force in my life. Back then, of course, I didn't know what homesteading was. It really wasn't a thing. And the way we see it today, that term modern homesteading hadn't been invented yet or thought of. But as I grew up and figured out kind of what I was going to do with the rest of my life, turning 18 and looking at colleges, long story short, I ended up going to an equine college, which brought me into needing an equine property as a newlywed, which then ended up being our first homestead, and the rest is history. So it's kind of an unorthodox way to get to where I am today, but I don't know, it makes for a good story at least.
I just wanted to tell you, because I am like the same way. Like, I grew up in the suburbs and just was obsessed with it from the beginning. And, everyone's like, oh, every little girl loves horses. And it's like, well, yeah, except for when you don't ever stop.
Exactly. And it borders obsession, but it's all good.
Yes.
So look where it got us. It's a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
So I know you mentioned the equine. So was that your main goal as far as homesteading, or why did you and your husband decide to do the full-blown homestead that you have now?
Yeah. So we bought the property we have now. We're still on the same land, because it was 2008. We were looking for a starter home, and we didn't want to live in town. And more than anything, I had 2 horses, I think, at the time. And I have, ever since a little girl, I wanted the horses out my front window. Like, I wanted to live on the same piece of property as my horses. And so, yeah. It's like, it's a big deal. If you're a horse girl, that's like the ultimate. And so,
totally.
We started to look for a property, and what we could afford was this totally tumble down fixer upper. And I say fixer upper, and people think like Joanna Gaines, like this was ugly fixer upper. Like, this was not charming. There were no good bones. It was not romantic. It was just ugly, but we could afford it. And it had 67 acres. And I'm like, all I could see was the horse property piece. I walked through the house once. I didn't even know where the master bedroom was. I was just like, it has acreage. I don't care about anything else. And so we bought the land for the horses very specifically, but it was this weird thing that kind of hit me, I think, honestly, as we literally signed the paperwork. And the first time I walked onto the property after signing, I was like, okay, horses. Yes, we're going to get the barn and the round pen and the corral set up. But I'm like, what if we could make the rest of it productive? And I just started to chew on that thought. And that's when that homesteading piece kind of entered in. Like, what if I could grow things and we could make produce food from the land. And that's where that kind of started to take root.
Awesome. Yeah. Make use of the entire property instead of just the original purpose. That's great.
So you're you kind of started with the horses. Did you, when you were living in the suburbs growing up, did your parents kind of like do a garden or anything like that to kind of like plant those seeds in your brain? Or is this like you're just jumping into this homestead, you're completely fresh, you don't have like any background as far as like gardening or canning or things like that?
Yeah. So my dad did have a garden. I don't remember. I mean, I was somewhat involved with it, but like I wasn't just super passionate about it. Like I remember going out there, we'd pick green beans and we'd walk around barefoot. But so that was nice. But he had kind of a different reason for gardening. It was less about food production and he just kind of wanted something to go putter around in. It's also really funny because he worked as a seed treatment salesman for a farm chemical company. So if people know much about me, they know I'm really organic. I'm really naturally minded. And so he literally was using industrial farm chemicals on our home garden, and like all our seeds were treated with chemicals and fungicides. And like, so he brought a very different energy into the gardening space. I still think, that exposure, we still have interesting conversations at Christmas sometimes about how I garden and how he gardens.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yes, but it's all good. It's all good. But I think that exposure was still good. My mom, she would put food on the table. She was a stay-at-home mom. She never loved cooking. And so like, I remember her canning peaches once or twice. I remember it being hot and sticky. And I'm like, this isn't my vibe. And so I had a little bit of exposure, but not a lot. And I guess my parents weren't super passionate about each of those ventures. So I definitely didn't see any passion coming from them. So I really rediscovered it. It felt like kind of for the first time as a young adult.
That's so awesome. It's really impressive that you can kind of like go from not having a huge background in it to just like going full force. So when you decided to buy your property, once you bought it, were you kind of like freaked out? Like, were you like, how are we going to do this? Like, did you have the imposter syndrome? Like, I'm not a horse person, I'm not a rancher or whatever, just like telling you that you couldn't actually do it and it wasn't going to succeed? Or were you a little bit more confident in that area?
That's a great question. I've definitely had a lot of imposter syndrome in different capacities over the years. Maybe not at that exact moment, but definitely with horses and definitely with ranching. Because being a first generation rancher, it's hard to break into the world sometimes, and people just don't take you seriously. They look at you weird. There's not a lot of room, I've found, unfortunately, in those spaces for people who are learning. People just kind of expect you to know it. And if you don't, you're an idiot. So that has been interesting. But I guess I didn't have as much imposter syndrome with the homesteading because I had the benefit of being one of the pioneers in that world. So there wasn't anyone on Instagram or any people really talking about it online. So I had nothing to compare it to, which was such a gift. Like I had the downfall was I didn't have anyone online to teach me. I had to really dig for the information, but I also kind of am thankful I didn't have, tons of people online already doing it. And I had to go, oh my gosh, I have so far to catch up. Mm-hmm. So I came into it at that weird little time. And I'm kind of thankful for that, actually.
Yeah, that's really nice. I grew up in the suburbs and all that, and I still live in the suburbs, and we're trying to find some property and move out there. But we're at this weird space where it's like, I feel like there's a lot of people that are wanting to do that now. So there's like a lot more competition as far as like getting land. I mean, that's not even talking about like prices of land and things like that. But it's an interesting climate that we're in right now.
It is. Like, never in a million years would I have thought that this would become trendy and that this would be like the thing to do. Like, it's quite the change of events. I think COVID had a lot to do with it, but I think people were even starting to feel the nudges before COVID. So it's been fascinating to watch it all go down.
Yeah, for sure.
I think in a technology saturated world, people are just longing for slowing down and doing things themselves again and learning new skills. So I think that's so important. But I agree with you. I think that was such a blessing for you getting started without all of the social media noise. And there's almost too much information out there that you can retain.
Yes.
Yes. But what were some of the first things you did once you started living as a homesteader? Like, what were some of your first things that you started dabbling into?
So the very first was a compost pile, which the horses had a role to play in that. Once again, we had all this horse manure and we couldn't afford a tractor because we just bought this property. We had a mortgage, and I'm like, the horse manure is piling up. It's not going to go anywhere. I can't move it or spread it. So I'm like, what am I going to do with it? And so compost came to my mind, and I'm like, okay, I got to figure out how to compost. And so we built bins. That was the first project we ever built on our property. And it wasn't very good compost. I don't think I ever really had a very complete pile, but I had started that. And I felt like that felt like a huge win. I felt like huge progress. And then I realized, okay, well, compost is really only valuable if you have vegetables to put it on. So like, I probably should put it in a garden. So we figured out a plot to dig up. And then I think after that, I impulse bought some chickens from Craigslist and brought them home in the backseat of my car. And then we got dairy goats, and then it just kind of has snowballed from there.
One animal at a time.
One animal at a time. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I've been known to bring goats in the back of cars and more cows than I said I was going to bring home. That's just how it works.
For sure. Yes. I feel like my husband and I, we definitely enable each other. I'll be like, we don't need geese. So he brings home geese. And he's like, we don't need more horses. So I bring home horses. And it's just like, I'm like, we're very toxic in this area of our life. So
I love that.
Yeah. So we used to live so my parents, when I was younger, we didn't have any land. When I became an adult, they ended up buying a couple of acres like within the suburbs. And so when we were first married, we lived on that property. And one day I just showed up with 2 piglets, or actually 3 piglets. My husband's like,
I love it.
You got pigs? I'm like, yeah. Where are we going to put them?
Yes.
I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Yes. I think forgiveness is way better than permission. I'm totally into that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just do it. See what happens. Yeah.
For sure.
It's time for our review of the week. This review is from Shelby DeLoa. She says, I'm loving the Paintbrush Prairie podcast. Finally, a podcast that I love and can relate to. I love how it feels so homey and like I've known these ladies my whole life, even though we live across the country. I can't wait to hear more. Thanks so much, Shelby, for your review. If you'd like to hop on Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review, we would so appreciate it. It really helps others find our podcast and know that it is worth listening to.
All right. So you have a new book coming out. I am so excited because I feel like it is going to be just like everything that we are all about. Kenzie kind of mentioned it, but we're in such a crazy culture where it's like, you have to put your kids in this and do that. And you have to have, you have to keep up with the status quo of like, what we do in our modern age. And a lot of people are starting to fight back, in their own way, because it's very stressful and it isn't always that enjoyable. So you are promoting living a more old-fashioned style life, and we totally are in line with that. In your new book, you kind of go over the 8 pillars of an old-fashioned life. Can you talk about more about what those pillars are and how we can attain them in our lives?
Yeah. So this book has been a really awesome project for me. It's been kind of a passion project just because, like you'd said, I believe so much in what homesteading does for humans. I think it keeps us human. I think it keeps us grounded and centered. I know what it's done for me. It's literally changed my life. I know it's cliche, but I just don't know how else to say it. It has changed my life for the better. But I also have been sitting with this tension for a couple of years that I know that not everyone can move to the country and get a milk cow. And not everyone even wants to. So I'm like, okay, I know this is crucial. Like the things I've learned in homesteading are crucial for humanity to stay sane. But I also know you can't all have, 67 acres in Wyoming. So I'm like, how do we distill it down and blend it together so everyone can have a piece of this? And that's ultimately why I wrote the book. It's a homesteading book, but not. It's for people who are feeling that call, they're feeling that unsettledness, that push towards something simpler and more slow, but they don't know how to get it because they're like, I can't move to the country right now. And so I thought about it long and hard and ended up recognizing 8 pillars of action steps in my life that have brought me the most joy and fulfillment. And that's what I based the book around. So some of them are really obvious, like cooking from scratch and growing some of your own ingredients and learning how to work with your hands. Some of them are maybe not as obvious, but still just as old fashioned and important, like rethinking our connection and our stewardship of the earth, building community, thinking about how we parent our kids in different ways, learning how to unplug from technology, not necessarily shun it completely, but just how to keep it in balance. And so that's what I explored. And I'm really excited for people to get it because I think it's a message that needs to get out to the world that, there's a way to live in our world and our culture. You don't have to necessarily go off grid or become Amish, but there's a way to do it with intention and awareness.
I love that. And I love how I've always admired how you kind of can be realistic about it. Like we can embrace old fashioned ways and we can live our life in a way that is simpler and what fits us and makes us content, but we don't necessarily have to, just completely like, I can't do any type of technology, right? Because that's like our modern world. We have to have technology. We have to utilize it to run our businesses and things like that. But we have to also be conscious and intentional with it. And, I've always admired the way that you think that way. And also when it comes to parenting or homesteading, we can utilize modern techniques, but we can do it in an intentional way. Not everything has to be, modernized.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that balance, that gray area has been a really big part of myself maturing into these ideas. I think especially more in the past, have a really black and white technology. And so initially when I started to be more aware of these old fashioned things, I wanted to swing super hard into the other extreme. So I was like living hardcore in the modern world. And I'm like, I'm going to swing way over here into all things old fashioned and be a super purist about everything. And I'm like, neither one works real great. Like both extremes will drive you crazy if you do them long enough. And so, yeah, I think, like you said, just coming back and figuring out that middle ground. Like I still obviously use technology. I'm sitting here in a fancy podcast studio and I have my iPhone next to me and I'm on Wi-Fi. I'm thankful for that. Otherwise I wouldn't get to connect with people like you guys and have these amazing conversations. But, being able to keep it in balance, it takes some forethought, but it's important and it's doable.
Yeah,
definitely.
Well, now that you've been doing this for 15 years now, and like you said, used to be very black or white. Now that you're where you are today, like how would you define slow living? Like what does slow living mean to you?
I just see it as just moving through life with more intention. And I think, when we're talking about different things, we kind of usually identify the antithesis of what we're doing. And I think the antithesis of slow living is industrial living, which most of modern culture is just entrenched in. And industrial living tells us that you're only happy by consuming more. You're only happy by keeping up with the rest. It tells you to kind of stay in your lane and in your box and sit down and shut up and do what you're supposed to do and don't question. And so to me, slow living is the exact opposite. And I ask a lot of questions. And one of my favorite questions is like, why do we have to do it like that? Why do we have to do it this way that we've been told, whether we're talking food or our careers or our education system or our healthcare? Like some of that's okay. But I think asking questions of those systems, it leads us down some really important paths. And so I think if you can ask those questions and be honest about the answers, it's going to point you into a pretty cool path of slow living, whatever that may look like for your situation.
And I feel like you just enjoy life so much more. You look at your everyday, what people would call mundane things, and you look at how big of a blessing those actually are and how much you enjoy those so much more than the hustle and bustle of everyday life. So I love that description.
Yesterday, I have a busy schedule right now. We started up our homeschool. I'm ready to launch this book. I'm traveling this week. I have lots of obligations, but like yesterday morning, I chose to spend the majority of the morning making apple butter for no good reason. Like it technically cost me more money to make it myself, cost me more time to make it myself.
Yeah.
But I got so much joy from that, just the process. And I was doing it. I'm like, I knew why I was doing it, but I was asking myself, Jill, why are you doing this? Like people would look at this and go, you are insane. You don't have time for this. But I'm like, but I have to have time for this because this is what makes it all worthwhile. And I think what you said, Kinsey, it's that like coming to appreciate those simple tasks more and getting dopamine from those things instead of just phones and Netflix and screens. Like that's definitely slow living.
Yes, exactly.
I've definitely had those moments where I'm like, well, I know I have a to-do list like 10 miles long. I have this work task I have to get done. I have this going on. I have this, but I have to take care of these peaches because the peaches are not going to last, like I have to bottle them.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, it's like, I want to do it, I don't feel like it's like, something that it's like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this. I get enjoyment from it. And I feel like the same thing is, you can say the same thing when you're raising animals, especially like when you're raising them for meat. Like we've done meat chickens and, we want to do beef, and we've had people that are like, why do you do that? You can just go to the store and buy chicken. It's like, but it's not the same. Like there's a whole process, and I was loving your apple butter post, and how you just were like, it's the process that we love, and we're gaining so much from doing the act of doing it, and it's not all about the end result necessarily.
Yes, totally.
So kind of along those lines, we talked about it a little bit, but why do you think people are moving toward living these slower, more intentional lives? Is it just that we're so completely overwhelmed, or is it that people are just being more willing to ask the questions and to be more true to themselves? Like, what do I really want? You know what I mean? Like, not just trying to do things because that's what you're supposed to do. Why do you think people are feeling like this?
I love this question, and I've sat with it a lot, especially as I've been writing this book. What conclusion I've come to, if you will, is I think we humans do love extremes, and we tend to overcompensate. So the pendulum swings hard when we as a culture take on new things. And so, we used to be more subsistence, close to the land by default. We didn't have a choice. After World War II, we came, and honestly, even before that, but World War II kind of stopped things for a while. And then after it ended, everything picked back up with a fervor. But after that era, we went full in, whole hog, obsessed with progress in all things industrial and all things man-made. And we followed that for many decades. And I think now we're starting to see the fruits of that, and we're starting to swing back, and people are just starting to go, okay, wait, the promises of industrialization didn't really come to fruition like I thought they would. They don't feel good. I'm not liking where this is ending up. I'm actually more miserable. And I think what we're seeing with this movement now of slow living, of homemaking, of homesteading, of home business, homeschooling, all the home things are coming back. I think it's a direct response to the last few decades of just extreme worship of the industrial ideas. And so, we can look back through history, and it's happened a couple other times. Actually, around the Great Depression era, I found this really interesting account of a young couple who moved out of the city, they said, because the city was becoming too fast-paced and hustle and bustle, and they moved to the country as the Great Depression took hold. And it was funny reading their words. If I hadn't known the era it was written in, I thought it would have been someone talking today.
Yeah.
And then I looked at the date, I'm like, wait a second, you were in the 20s. That's when that's the time period we all idolize, and you were still feeling that hustle and bustle and chaos of modernity. And then it happened again in the 1970s. The back to the land movement. There's a lot of societal chaos then. People went back to the land, and I see it happening again now. So I think it's a cycle that when we get chaotic as a culture, there's something in us that calls us back to our roots and calls us back to the earth. And I think that's important. And I hope we continue to listen to that as a society.
I love that.
It's crazy how history just repeats itself.
Yes.
We think that it doesn't, but you just take note of these patterns, and it's wild.
It's crazy. Yeah.
So I love how you talk about the modern human zoo. How can you achieve the homestead life even if you don't live on a farm? Because I know Talia has talked about she didn't come from that, whereas I'm like a 5th generation farmer and rancher. So it's kind of all I know.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to me to have conversations with others like you who this is your first time and you're killing it. It's great. But I love seeing other people, like you said, who aren't able to achieve 67 acres of land or however many to have the homestead and farm life, but how can they still achieve that with what little they do have?
Yes. So, I have a chapter in the book called Escape the Human Zoo. And when I wrote it, I was really thinking about people, I always try to think about, okay, so what's the most opposite of me here in Wyoming out in the middle of nowhere on the prairie. And it's like someone who's in the middle of New York, like they are surrounded by human and human made things. And that's all they can see from sun up till sundown is just humanness. And so I'm thinking, okay, how could my principles, my ideas apply to someone like that? And so that's a little trickier. Obviously, you're going to have to put more effort forth. But what the ideas I was chewing on and coming up with is, I think if we can just be more conscious of how we're moving through the world and be thinking about how did our ancestors, what did they come in contact with throughout the day? They were coming in contact with soil and grass. They were coming in contact with different sorts of light than we do now. They were out in nature in some regard, and they were moving their bodies naturally, not because they were exercising or trying to get in steps. They just had to move their bodies because they didn't have a choice. And I don't think any of them realized, or very few of our ancestors realized, that combination and that formula was making them a lot more physically and mentally healthy. I think everyone just took it for granted. And so when I see someone like in New York, or even someone in the suburbs, it's a little easier in the suburbs. I'm like, okay, so we can make sure we're getting nature time every day. Even if you worked in a high rise in New York City, you could go out and have your lunch outside, like put your body on the grass or the soil, take your shoes off. I don't care if people think you're crazy. I think they're crazy for never touching the soil. So put your hands in the grass, get some fresh air. Make sure watch your light. Like people, I think there's more talk of that in the biohacking world now, but a lot of people don't realize, we're switching our light around and it's messing up our circadian rhythm. It's affecting our sleep and our hormones and all of those things. So, avoid blue light at night, which is unfortunately screen light. Our bodies are designed to have blue light in the morning because that's morning light. And then in the evening we have, traditionally we're designed to be in the yellow and the orange light. It's like fire. People have been sitting around fires for thousands of years. That's not to say you need to start a fire in your living room every night. Maybe you could if you have a fireplace, but like, how can you mimic that? How can you just follow the natural order or the flow of the sun from sun up till sundown? And then just moving our bodies in purposeful ways. I love working out. I don't love working out. I work out because I know it's good for me. Let me phrase it like that. I do have a gym, but I also find that the best times of moving my body are when I'm doing something along with it, and like combination exercises. So I think anyone, anywhere can take those old fashioned principles and weave them into their modern life, even if you live in the middle of a big city.
Yeah, those are such good recommendations. I love that.
Yeah, it was funny. I was actually just talking to my husband last night about the whole like circadian rhythm and like how it is being affected by our, not only our screens, but even just like the normal lights that we turn on in our house. And I'm like, because, we were talking about his sleep issues, and it's like, well, yeah, you could go to a doctor. They're probably just going to give you a sleeping pill instead of just being like, here, turn the lights down, use blue light glasses or whatever, things like that. I don't know. It's the little tiny things that people don't think about because we've just learned how to live in this really fast-paced world, and we're not even being conscious of how it's affecting our health overall. So
yeah, totally. And those little changes sometimes, people don't talk about them as much because it's free, right? The sleeping pills, like somebody's incentivized to give you a sleeping pill, but I don't know, to turn off your lights at night, like nobody makes any money from that. They actually, power companies lose money from that. So like no one's going to be talking about that just here and there. So it's just funny. I feel like those are little nuggets that we get when we just start to ask those good questions.
Yeah. It's great.
Here at the Paintbrush Prairie, one of our favorite ways to preserve food is through canning. We talk a lot about it here on the podcast, and we are so excited to share a company with you that we absolutely love and are excited to partner with as homesteaders and homemakers. 4 Jars USA is a family-owned canning lid company. Their canning lids are crafted with utmost care using high-quality metal that resists bending, ensures durability and longevity. To combat the common issue of rusting, they have incorporated stainless steel into their lid composition. Compared to conventional lids with a thickness of 0.10 to 0.12 millimeters, their lids boast a superior metal thickness of 0.18 millimeters. They personally subject their lids to rigorous testing, ensuring their exceptional performance under pressure and during water baths. They stand behind the reliability and strength of all of their lids. Additionally, 4 Jars lids feature high-quality food-grade silicone that effectively prevents leakage, allowing you to confidently preserve your favorite homemade dishes. With their lids, you can savor the authentic taste of your beloved foods for extended periods. We are proud to support and partner alongside 4Jars USA as an affiliate for their canning-led company. You can use our code PAINT10 for 10% off any order at 4jars.shop.
All right, so we're going to kind of talk a little bit about motherhood. We are both mothers, and it's a really big part of our show. We have a lot of mothers who listen. Motherhood can really kind of take you and shake you to the core, right? I mean, it can completely change who you are. How did having your children change you or change your outlook on life? Because I know before I had kids, I mean, I've always wanted to kind of like move out there, live on a ranch and things like that. But everything got amplified when I had kids. So how did it do that for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sorry if I'm waving. It's flies. There's a fly trying to land on my face and it's making me angry. Trying to be like incognito, but it's real hard. So I'm not doing sign language, I promise. So the homestead and the babies kind of came along. Well, I guess our first child came about a year and a half after we bought our property. So it was really kind of in tandem. I was growing as a mom and learning how to parent as I was learning how to homestead. I think the biggest thing that probably a lot of people can relate with is that once you have kids, you realize you're not just living for yourself. And I know it made the burden of responsibility on me a lot heavier. Like, okay, I got to figure out how to eat better and I got to be paying attention to the chemicals. And that, I was already semi-interested in that because of the homestead. And then I was like, no, it's time to get serious. And so I think that was good. It was a good bit of leverage on me. And also, I think having the kids just inspired me to figure out how I could create the kind of life I wanted them to grow up in. Not that it would be perfect or exactly this or that, but I think that also just gave us a lot of oomph to drive the homesteading efforts forward.
Yeah, I'm kind of in that stage right now. My kids are still pretty little, but I'm like, every day that ticks by, I'm like, I gotta do this. Like, I gotta make this happen so that my little girl can like raise her livestock and, be able to do those things that I didn't get to do as a child and things that I find so much value in. And so, yeah.
Yes. I know there's nothing like it to give you that little extra oomph of motivation.
Right.
So, yeah.
So just from following and reading your blog and following you on social media, I feel like we have similar parenting strategies. And I think as just homesteaders and ranchers and farmers, we all kind of have similar ways of how we like to parent our kids. But I want to hear about your vintage parenting strategies. What are they? And how are they different from, the modern parenting techniques that we're seeing in our culture right now?
Yeah. This can be a really controversial topic. As I was writing this chapter in my book, even I had some interesting discussions with the editor. I think anyway, it can be a controversial topic. I think, lots of thoughts here. Our modern parenting culture that starts off with the best of intentions. People want their kids to be super safe and super successful in life. But what happens is it's really easy to fall into helicopter parenting mode where we are just hovering and we are micromanaging and we're trying to do everything we can to set up our kids for success. And the people that I know who are of that helicopter mindset, they're not bad parents. They're just trying to do the best they know how. But what I see happening on the other end of that is you have kids that they're not prepared for the world. They're not confident. They're not resilient. They're not competent. They don't know how to do things. And because they've always had things done for them. And so I think as I look at the opposite of that, I'm, always thinking like, how did it work 150 years ago before helicopter parenting became a thing? Not that every bit of vintage parenting was great, because there were some things, chimney sweeps. I'm not going to go back and try to like really bad child labor. Like, we're not going to go into the kids in factories. Like, there's obviously things to leave in the past. But I'm thinking, historically, traditionally, we didn't chase our kids around and keep them in padded jumpsuits all day long. Like, they had a lot more autonomy, a lot more independence. And if we look at some of the historical trends, like kids were doing really responsible, important things at a much younger age than we expect them to now, right? Like there were not that I'm saying this is good, but there were kids fighting in wars age 12, 13, 14. Whereas now, we kind of look at, even in college, we kind of expect kids not to be responsible or even be able to take care of themselves or feed themselves. I'm not saying send your kids to war, but I'm like, kids are more capable. My point is,
Right.
kids are more capable than we think. And
Yes.
everyone knows their child, and you have to make concessions according to your kid's ability. So of course there's all of that. But I have been amazed as I've let my kids have a longer leash and given them more independence and let them make those choices, how much they've matured and grown into that. And it's really cool to watch. And the homestead gives us lots of ways to do that, but you really can do that anywhere, no matter where you live. And I've just really been enjoying the fruits of that. My kids are a little older now, 13, 10, and 7. And those seeds that we started planting at a young age are really starting to pay off now. So I just encourage people, rethink helicopter mom culture just a little bit. I understand safety and all of those things, but when you can take a deep breath and let your kids do a little bit of risk, or take a little bit of risk, or be a little more independent, good things happen.
Yeah. Well, and you see those people who did have, the older generations from the Great Depression to just say like post World War II, they had so much more grit instilled in them. And
Yes.
I felt like it was just a completely different culture than what we are used to now. And I saw, or I listened to a quote. I cannot remember the podcast it was on, and I'll have to find this and put it in the show notes and actually quote this person. But I thought it was very interesting, and it was and it was pertaining to men, but I would just say our entire culture. But the hard times make strong men make good times make weak men, and weak men make hard times. So
Amen. Amen to that.
I love the vintage parenting principles and trying to bring those back. Of course, not all of them, but a lot of those, to bring that grit back into our society.
Yeah.
It's funny too, because, we're calling them like vintage principles, but they're really just the way that life should be lived, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's learning independence and self-reliance, right?
Yes.
Children need to be given responsibilities that are age appropriate and that they can achieve, right?
Yeah.
Because the achievement helps build their self-confidence.
Yes.
And it makes them know that they can do anything that they put their mind to, right? Yeah. And so I just think it's great, because kids really need that. And, whether it's just making sure that your lamb gets fed and watered every day, right? They can do that. And when they are able to see the fruits of their labor, that's what makes them just blossom, right?
Yes. Yeah. And the natural rewards and natural consequences will do so much more than mom nagging ever will. And that's been like, I started off very much more micromanaging than I am now. Just as a new parent and a young parent, I had to kind of try that on for size. And I started to see what was going to happen. My poor oldest, the oldest children always get the brunt of the experiments. And then as I started to see, the guinea pigs, sorry guys, I'll pay for therapy later if you need it. And then I tried that on, and I'm like, I don't know. It feels like I'm making them more dependent on me. And so I'm like, what if I try it this way? And then I'm like, oh, this is way better, because it makes it easier on us as parents, which I hear so many moms are like, oh, I'm exhausted, and I'm just like, I'm depressed, and I'm anxious, and I don't have any time to myself, and I can't take a shower because my 8-year-old, won't stop bothering me. And I'm like, stop the merry-go-round. Like, you don't have to live as a slave to your kids, and you don't have to entertain them all the time. And you shouldn't have to be like laser focused on them all the time. Like, when you start to implement some of these old-fashioned parenting strategies, it makes life easier for you, and it makes a happier kid in the process. So I'm kind of like, it's a win-win.
Yeah. Give them an imagination. Let them be bored.
Let them be bored. Amen to that. Yeah.
Yeah. So along those lines, you kind of go into how you need to let kids do things that could be considered dangerous, but in the end, it will help make them safer. Can you kind of go into a little bit more detail on that?
Yeah. So I found some pretty interesting research by a doctor from Norway. I think her name's Helen Sandcedar. I might be pronouncing her name wrong, but it's in the book. And she was just talking about how kids need risky play, which is such a red flag for so many parents in our culture. I was even scared to put it in the book because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to make some people really upset. But she said that she identified a number of different types of risky play, like heights or going fast, like riding your bike fast, or adventuring alone. I mean, if you can think back to maybe your childhood, the times when you got to go be in nature alone or with a group of just other children and no adults were present, like how that felt, it was really exciting. Balancing, there's a bunch of different, playing with sharp objects, all the things that every mom skin crawl. But she was talking about how it's really important for a child's development to have exposure to those things within reason. And in her research, she found that kids who had exposure to risky play actually developed more self-preservation and learned how to be safer in the long run. And I've found that, I have to be careful how I say this because I'm not judging other moms, but I've seen that in children who come to our farm, the ones who've been, really coddled and bubble wrapped their whole lives. They don't have the self-preservation around animals or sharp objects or riding their bikes. It's just kind of like they're going whole hog, and it's scary to watch. Whereas my kids who've had more exposure to those dangerous things, if you will, they understand, okay, too fast means you crash. Too high means it's not comfortable. So they've learned how to regulate themselves, which is an important part of being an adult. So it's just kind of that fascinating paradox when you think about it.
Yeah, I think that is so important. And it's so hard as a parent.
It is hard as a parent. It's totally hard.
When your kid is little and you're like, I don't want you to crack your head open.
Yes.
But you have to learn to loosen the reins. And even if you're watching the whole thing, right?
Yes.
It's not like you just have to be like, okay, go outside and go run around in the horse pasture.
Yes.
I'm not going to watch you. It's like you can watch your child, teach them the expectations and the safety precautions and, how to be safe around certain animals or whatever. And then watch them make sure that they're implementing that. And then you can kind of loosen the reins, knowing, I mean, even my daughter, we're trying to teach her how to be safe around horses.
Yeah.
And because she's to the age where she wants to go into the horse pasture alone with the horse.
Yes.
And so I'm like, okay, you got to make sure you're safe around their backside and, don't move and be a crazy person because then they might get spooked, that kind of thing. And she really takes it seriously. And so I think it's really important to give children those opportunities. It's really funny. There is a certain kid show, I'm not going to say the name, but they are teaching kids how to cook certain dishes. And it's designed for inner city type children. And so the characters on the show are cutting up the food, but they never actually show that you cut food with a knife.
Oh my gosh.
They cut it with their hands and it magically
appears
and it's all cut up. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm just we are seriously missing something here because the kid, even my 2-year-old has watched it and he'll try to cut things with his hands and
it's not working.
It's just not how it works.
Yes.
But it's silly things like that where I'm like, why are we teaching these things in our culture? We should just be teaching how to be safe with them, right?
Yeah. Right.
So.
And I mean, within reason, I wouldn't give my 2-year-old a meat cleaver, but I will totally give a 2-year-old a butter knife and be like, here, cut this banana with a butter knife. If you, he's not going to cut a finger off, but he might scrape himself. Hey, then you learn, keep your fingers out of the way, and that's so much more valuable. Yeah. I think we're doing our kids such a disservice because I'm like, okay, at what point, somebody told me the other day, they're like, I don't let my 8-year-olds have a butter knife. And I'm like, well, that's concerning because at some point they'll have to butter their own bread. When is it safe enough? Because at 15, I don't know if you've never trusted them with a sharp object. Can you trust them at 15? I don't know. How far are we taking this? So it's, I know people are doing it with good intention and people get, I don't want to sound judgy or mean, but it's hurting the kids in the long run. I truly believe.
Yeah.
Well, I just think about looking back on my own childhood and I mean, because I've had horses my whole life, but I would go off on our property, on hundreds of acres and just go on a trail ride by myself. I didn't have a cell phone and my parents just knew that I'd come back. And if I didn't in a certain amount of time, they'd go look for me. I mean, and to think of letting my own kids do that, it does scare me.
Yes.
But I look back now and I think I'm fine to go off on my own and be alone and like in the woods or in town or wherever. And I'm aware of my surroundings, not just with animals, but with people. Like it's made me learn how to pay attention and just that self-awareness. And I think that is just, it's so important. These principles apply to so many other facets of life. And we have to be willing to let our kids fall and mess up and maybe even break something every now and then to learn these lessons before they do get in the real world. It's like you were saying, like not using a butter knife until they're 15 and then you expect them to drive a car in a year, you know?
Exactly. Then it's like, oh, you're going to college at 18. Good luck. I'm like, no wonder all these kids are like failure to launch. And then everyone complains about it. I'm like, we've created the problem. I'm like, 18-year-olds aren't getting houses and driving because we've not let them use butter knives forever.
Right.
So like, how do you expect to just flip the switch and have them be competent adults? Doesn't work.
You can't blame these kids and this new Gen X or whatever, millennials or what have you. It's like we have to look further back into who raised these people, and we've got to change that with what's coming up. I mean, these people are going to be leading our country, and that is terrifying sometimes.
Yes.
But to expand on that though, because, we do farm and ranch and our kids have always known work, we've talked about this in one of our previous episodes, but about giving our kids responsibility and chores and, like my kids have always known work. They've always had some sort of chore and we've expanded that as they've gotten older, given them more responsibility. But how are your kids involved on your homestead and what kind of activities are they involved in, if they're involved in any like extracurricular, maybe showing or my kids show livestock. So what other things do your kids do and what responsibilities come with that?
So having the kids as a part of our labor force has been a big priority since day one. Even people often email me and they're like, I have a 2-year-old and 3-year-old and it's really hard to get them to do anything. And I'm like, well, because that's a tough age. Totally. Yeah. And like, usually like when they would start chores at a young preschool age, it was not helpful. It was totally more time consuming.
Right.
And kind of annoying sometimes, but like, it was worth it because, and I'm sure Kinsey, you've seen the same thing. The kids get older and then they become confident. And like now with them being a little bit older, they basically run all of our barn chores. And so people are always like, oh, you guys must have, you must be out there doing chores. It must be so hard to get all your chores done before you do your work. And I'm like, I actually don't go to the barn for days at a time sometimes because the kids just run it. And like our 13-year-old, we trained her on how to use the milking machine last year. So we had bottle calves and she would milk the cow and get the bottles all set up. And it was like, she took a lot of pride in it. Like, and that's what I think people don't realize is it's not like, do my kids complain sometimes about chores? Sure. But most of the time it's like it feels good. They're getting that feedback loop in their brain that like, I know how to do this. And most kids don't. And I feel really confident in this. And so she took so much pride in having the system and how she washed the bottles and how she organized the calves and how she got the milk to each one. And then, so she handles that. She'll also help like manage our horse, walking them on and off hay in the winter and making sure they don't get too fat. Our son does all the chickens. And so we have multiple chicken tractors and things, and he feeds and waters. And then my youngest does her rabbits and she collects eggs and feeds dogs and checks cats and all that. So we kind of have this hierarchy of chores that they are advancing through as they get older. But it went from, I don't even remember exactly when it happened, but I remember at one point it was like kind of a liability to have them doing chores. And then one day it kind of magically turned into a huge asset. So to the point now when they went on a trip to their grandma's for a week in June this year. And my husband and I had to do all the chores and we're like, we didn't even know what to do. We had to have like them write us lists before they left. And I had to call my daughter and be like, which bucket has what grain? I don't know. How do I feed your steer? I don't know what to do. So it was funny, but I'm been amazed again, how capable they are. And as far as extracurriculars, like that can be tricky. We live farther away from town where all the stuff is. So that's a little tricky to coordinate driving. And also I kind of have a beef with I have a lot of beefs with modern parenting culture, but I have a beef about the kids have to be in activities like every single day, every single weeknight. And I think it's exhausting for the families and it creates so much division. And I don't believe every family member needs to be in a separate location all the time. And so, but I also want my kids to have socialization and I want them to have passions and hobbies. And so we try to keep it limited. So
Yeah.
we do 4-H. My daughter shows steers. My son shows chickens, which I don't really know why. He just likes chickens. So 4-H is our big summer thing. We get ready for fair, and then a little bit of sports. I feel like sports can become all consuming so fast. And so my daughter does basketball. My son and my younger daughter will do soccer for a month, at really low key soccer. And then that's about it. We really like our evenings at home as a family. We like our
Yeah.
weekends at home as a family. And so I try to just keep it in balance, which is easier said than done sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. We do 4-H as well, and we love it. I did 4-H growing up. My parents did FFA,
Yeah.
and we really enjoy that. But I agree, the activities are exhausting. I just see it on social media a lot. They're just going from ball practice to ball practice, and I'm like, when do you guys ever sit down and eat a meal together? It's almost like breaking up that family unit. So, but I agree. Also, like, it is important to get them into some things and have a goal and be socialized with other kids and stuff.
Sure. So. Yeah, it's a balance, but balance isn't always easy, but we try. Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, a lot of it is about priorities too. And, where we are living this more simple, slowed down homesteading style life, that's the life that we are choosing for our children, right? We are choosing to put a higher priority on the lifestyle and teaching them the skills from the lifestyle rather than them, like outsourcing, having other people teach them or making peers such a huge influence on them. That's not our priority. It doesn't mean that they don't have friends, and doesn't mean that they can't go out and socialize. It's just we have different values, and
yes, for sure,
that we choose to get them from our lifestyle. And I just think that's that's the biggest difference.
Yeah. And I think kids having empty space, I think people are really afraid to give kids room to be bored or room to just be. And I think that's one of the biggest fallacies of modern parenting, because when kids are bored, when they do have blank afternoons or blank evenings, that's when they start to create and figure out who they are and figure out what they love. And if we never let them have that quiet time, they miss out on that. And I think that's sad when that happens.
Yeah, they grow up and they're like, what do I like? What am I into? What do I enjoy?
Yeah. You see that a lot, more and more these days.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're kind of getting to our last couple of questions, but did you ever, when you had, gotten onto this homestead, had your kids and started building and creating this life that you're living now, did you ever envision that it would turn into what it has, and that you would become so well known as a homesteader and an entrepreneur? And along with that, what are some lessons that you've learned from growing and running your business? Because we're both entrepreneurs, kind of, trying to make it and figure it out while we're homesteading and being mothers and homeschooling and all of the things. So just kind of go into a little bit of that.
Yeah, I certainly never thought it would turn into this. It's wild to think back. I don't know how I even could have imagined this would be what I'm doing now. It's just crazy. I'm really thankful for it. I think that I've learned so many lessons. I love, homesteading and entrepreneurship. They kind of run in parallel, as they teach you just a lot about yourself if you're willing to listen. They help you grow up and mature and develop as a person, which I love. Sometimes that's hard. Sometimes it's fun, but I love that journey of always being challenged and always trying to get better. I think some of the lessons that have stuck out with me the most from entrepreneurship, but also homesteading, I think the biggest one is just listen to your gut. I had such a hard time doing that as a young adult for various reasons. And the whole process of homesteading and entrepreneurship, often this has been some of the harder lessons when I haven't listened to my gut, but just learning to listen to your intuition, to trust the little voice inside of you, what it's telling you to do, whether it's a business decision or an animal decision or different things. Like, that has been one of the most important lessons of my life. I think the other big lesson is that just because it's hard doesn't mean it's bad. I think especially in modern culture, we're always looking for ease and convenience and the smooth path. And I understand why we're wired to seek that out. But I see so often in people around me, when they're chasing a passion or a dream or a goal, the first little bit that gets rocky or challenging, they start to question and go, maybe this isn't right. Or maybe I hear a lot, God doesn't want me to do this. Or, this wasn't meant to be. And I'm like, no. If your gut has told you to go, then that doesn't mean it's like you're guaranteed a smooth path. Like you just keep on trucking. Like you have to keep pushing through. And the best lessons come on the other side of those challenges and those hardships and those learning lessons where you're slogging through and you're not sure if you're going to make it. Like that's where the good stuff lies. And so I always encourage people, it's okay to doubt. It's okay to go, am I crazy? What am I doing? Like ask yourself those questions, but don't just let it, when things get rocky, make you run backwards and doubt the calling, because there's good stuff on the other side of that.
I love that so much. I feel like it goes in line with everything from like being on the homestead, motherhood, everything that you're encountering. You just have to trust your instincts and just keep going. I mean, I've had so many times in my life where like I just feel this nudge, right? God put something on my heart and it's like, you need to do this. And everyone else around me might not understand why,
Yes.
but I have to do it. And if I like leave it alone for a little while, like, oh, I can't do that right now, it like never stops.
Yes.
Like it never stops bugging me and until I just do it. Right. And so I just think that is such a great lesson.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, tell us where all of our listeners can find you.
So my original blog that I started a long time ago is still going strong. It's the prairiehomestead.com. And that's kind of the hub with all of my stuff there. And then I'd say the place that I create most frequently and the place I love to create the most is on my podcast, Old Fashioned on Purpose. And then for those who do social media, I'm over on Instagram most actively, and it's jill.winger is my handle.
And you can also watch your podcast on YouTube, right?
That is correct. Yes. I used to do regular YouTube videos and I don't much anymore, but the podcasts are all still over there.
Awesome. And then tell everyone when you expect your book to be released. I know that they can get on and pre-order on your website right now, but when is your like official launch date?
Yeah. So September 26th, 2023 is the official date. Pre-orders are kind of a big deal for authors. So anyone who pre-orders before that, and even I think we're going to extend it into launch week itself, then they get a bunch of bonuses. So there is some extra goodies if you want to do a little early and do some delayed gratification.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. Go to her website and look at her pre-order page, and it kind of lines out all of the extras that you get. And there's some really, really cool things that you can get if you pre-order. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I know that you are super busy, and we just appreciate you so much for coming on. And we're really, really excited to have you on.
Thank you. This was such fun, and I'm privileged to be one of your early guests. So thank you again.
Yeah. You're awesome.
We feel like we hit it out of the park having you as our first guest because you're like
and I'll be
we're
like,
such fangirls.
When you're big and famous, I'll be like, I was on there first, but so there you go. When you're out there competing with Joe Rogan. So
oh goodness. Oh goodness.
Right.
Goodness. Okay. So one thing that we did want to do for our guest, on every episode that whoever we interview, we want to ask 10 rapid fire questions, just something fun, something lighthearted to end out our episode. So Talia and I are going to go back and forth and ask you a question, and then we'll finish up the episode.
Awesome. Sounds good.
All right, Talia, you want to take it away?
All right. So what are you reading right now?
Oh, too many things. I have multiple books going. But the one that I'm really working on finishing is called The Need to Be Whole by Wendell Berry. I love Wendell Berry. So it's his latest one.
All right.
That's awesome.
Okay. So sagebrush or blue stem?
Sagebrush. Yes.
I'm a sagebrush gal myself.
Yes. All day long.
All right. Favorite part of being a homesteader or rancher?
I just like living life on our own terms. I think that's my favorite part.
Yes. Okay, what is one thing that you have on your bucket list?
Maybe I'm progressing toward it. So maybe it's not like a big bucket list item, like jumping out of an airplane, but I'm going to rope at our next branding next year. And I've been chickening out for several years and like over practicing and over preparing, but I'm going to do it next year. I'm going to rope off the horse I started myself. I'm going to rope some cattle, and it's happening.
Yay.
So that's
That's
the big one I'm
exciting.
working towards. Yeah.
That's exciting. Love that.
That is so awesome. What is your favorite steak cut and how do you like it cooked?
Ooh. I mean, filet mignon probably. Like, it's hard to argue with that one. And I'm definitely medium. I used to be a well done, and I like the older I get, I'm like going pinker and pinker. So
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
What's your favorite wildflower?
Oh no. I'm blank. Probably Indian paintbrush. That's Wyoming state flower, and every time I see it,
Yeah.
I just love it. Yeah.
Ours too.
Our favorite too.
Is it? Oh my gosh. I didn't know that.
Yep. All right. Log cabin or old farmhouse?
Old farmhouse. Yeah.
I figured that would be more your style.
Yeah. Okay. Your favorite recipe or meal to make for your family?
I love a good roast beef supper, like on a winter evening with mashed potatoes and green beans and gravy and like a pie, just like classic and homey. I think that's one of my favorites.
Comfort food.
Comfort food. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Have you ever had an animal that had a big impact on your life or was particularly memorable?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think my first horse, his name was Jake, and he was nothing to write home about. He was swayback and old, and he had a frizzy mane, and he was not very fun to ride. He was safe, but he was not fun. But he was he's still my first love in the horse world because he, that was a lifelong dream, and I learned a ton, and he didn't kill me. So good old Jake. So.
Something about the first horse.
I feel like every horse girl has that one horse, like the one that they had in their life, and we all have that one special guy or gal. Okay, and
for sure.
Last question, share one random fact about you that others may not know.
Oh gosh. These are hard. It's not hard. It's just I just go stupid and blank when I think about these. I'm kind of a nerd about things. I think people don't realize, I get latched onto a topic so hard into it, which has made me a good content creator. But I think people don't realize, if you're an actual friend who's around me in real life, you're like, Jill, stop talking about weird things because no one cares. So I think that's what people don't realize is I'm pretty nerdy in real life. Yeah.
I think both of us can relate to that.
Yes.
We have our areas where we're just geek out on things.
Yeah. Like, you're obsessive. You're obsessive. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know why that's a problem. So yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
Well, Jill, we really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're really busy, and I love this conversation. I think it's going to benefit so many other people, and that's the point of this podcast. And so we just appreciate your time and for joining us today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. This was a blast. You guys are awesome. So.
All right. Well, we'll wrap up this episode. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for listening to the Paintbrush Prairie podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you don't mind, would you please leave us a rating and review?
This will help more ladies find us, and it will help us make the show even better. If you know a fellow Western homemaker who would enjoy the podcast, will you please share it with them?
If you'd like to support the podcast, you can become a patron at patreon.com/paintbrushprairie. You can follow us on Instagram at paintbrushprairie.
You can find me, Kinsey, on Instagram at @farmgirl and my blog, farmgirlblogs.com, to see what I'm up to on the ranch, Western home inspiration, or subscribe to my meal plan subscription at farmgirlblogs.com/hayfield-meals. You can also shop for unique Western goods at my rural boutique and general store, farmgirlboutique.com.
You can follow me, Talia, on Instagram at The Pinion Range or my Western art page at Wapiti Sage Design. You can also purchase my artwork or book a custom piece at wapitisagedesign.com. I also blog over at thepinionrange.com, and you can subscribe to my YouTube channel where I share the behind the scenes of my life as a Western artist and homesteader.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. See you next time from the Paintbrush Prairie.